Hi again, guys, and welcome to the 13th installment of Beards and Cars, the more informal series for stuff that doesn't slot into a traditional video, a review or a tune or highlights or anything like that. It's about any topic. Could be cars, bikes, movies, YouTube, drama, life, all that kind of good stuff. And last week, of course, I asked you guys if there were any particular subjects or specific things that you'd like to hear me talk about or to discuss between you guys and me in the comments below the videos. And there was one response in particular that was my thoughts on the Le Mans and also motorsport in general. And this is something which I have kind of covered before. I've touched on it quite a few times in various series, be it Spirit of Le Mans, Appreciation of Innovation, High Rollers even. I've talked about various motorsport series, the rules, the regulations, vehicles which were banned. So a lot of those thoughts I have touched on before, so I don't really want to repeat that stuff again. But in general, motorsport isn't something that I watch that much. That may seem ironic given how much I talk about cars and how much I love them, but to me I don't have the kind of interest which other people have in motorsport, because specifically motorsport, at least from my point of view, doesn't seem to be about the cars anymore. It's more about the drivers and the drama around the drivers and the teams. Now, of course, those things have always been the case. Rivalries, for instance, like Lauda versus Hunt, various other rivalries through the years. We touched on that discussing Rush, the movie, a great example of that. So that's not really a new thing, but I guess I have more of an issue as far as entertainment value goes for me personally, with the fact that it's almost like the cars aren't even necessary anymore. Whereas back in the day, motorsport was a passioned thing, specifically for certain cars. And that's why cars from back then are iconic. If you asked someone to name a modern iconic Le Mans car, for instance, or a modern iconic Formula One car, they might be able to come up with one, especially in the Formula One where the names are obscure, you don't really hear about the cars' names much, it's just the team name or the driver name. Super fans of the Grand Prix would be able to give you a name. You know, it's the Ferrari F015, whatever they want to call it this particular year, the F2017, whatever. But most people wouldn't even have a clue. I don't have a clue what the cars' names are. I like Mercedes, I like Ferrari, but I don't care what those cars are because they're all just so similar that it becomes almost meaningless. And again, it's much more designed and geared towards being about driver rivalries rather than car rivalries, and about team rivalries more than car rivalries. And of course, back in the day, you had rivalries like McLaren in the Can-Am up against like Chaparral and various others, but it was more about specific cars back then. Or at least that's what it seems to me looking back now. Maybe there are people who would disagree with that, who were alive at the time. But stuff like the GT40. People don't remember Ford winning the Le Mans 4 times in a row. People remember the GT40 winning the Le Mans 4 times in a row on Ford's behalf, because it was about the car. People don't remember that Mazda won in 1991 at the Le Mans. People remember that the 787B won, because again, it was about the car. Whereas nowadays, as I already mentioned with the F1, most people, even most people that watch the race, could not name a single one of the actual F1 models that are on the grid. Whereas back in the day, there are plenty of older Grand Prix cars that I know of because they stood out back then. There were still experimental things being used, stuff like the Williams FW15C with the CVT gearbox, stuff like the Brabham BT46B with the fan system, stuff like the Benetton B186, which is still the most powerful Grand Prix car of all time, 1400 horsepower in qualifying form from a 1.5 litre engine, because those cars stand out. Now, I can't name all the cars on the grid, of course not, because at the end of the day, I am not an F1 fan, and the reason why I remember those cars isn't because I like them, it's because I respect the technology that was used behind them. That's what makes me remember those cars. Whereas nowadays, there's nothing to make them stand out anymore. It's just about whichever team is winning. It's not about which car is the most impressive. I mean, it is, if you think about it, but it's kind of not at the same time, because fans don't follow cars, they follow teams. I have friends who like the Grand Prix, but they don't say, oh, the car is really cool, it has this engine, this power, it uses this experimental thing, it tried this alternative tech here and there. They just say, oh, the McLaren car isn't as strong this year. Oh, the Ferrari car is looking better this year. That has no interest to me whatsoever. I have never cared about the drivers at all, which is, to be honest, one of the reasons why I liked Rush so much, because it presented the drivers in a way that made you care. Whereas, apart from that, I just didn't. And it's not because I wasn't alive at the time. I don't seek out information about drivers. There are only a few select drivers over the years and a few select teams that I have interest in. And it's generally not because of the fact that I like the guy or follow his work. It's just because they have a certain exploit which stands out to me. For instance, Stefan Beloff. I don't know how many races he won. I don't know how successful he was in general. I only remember his name because he still has the all-time Nürburgring lap record of 6 minutes 11 seconds in a Porsche 956 Group C car. That's cool. If he hadn't have done that, I wouldn't care less about him, because to me the drivers are only there to pilot the cars, which sounds like an obvious statement, but that's almost not the way it works anymore. It's all about the guys. People like the drama behind the scenes between the drivers. Whereas to me, that's just not that interesting. If I wanted to see drama between people, I'd just watch a movie. To me, the sport is more about the car, but I know for the vast majority of people that's not the case. People do like the drama between teams, between drivers, all that kind of stuff. Whereas me, I guess being antisocial in general just means that it doesn't appeal to me at all. But my thoughts on motorsport beyond that, because that's kind of one specific point of it, is that I like how focused on safety it is now. That's good, because of course it is a dangerous thing, and I've discussed safety before, because safety is the #1 killer of innovation. So I have a mixed feeling about it. I don't have an issue with improving safety, but at the end of the day, you're driving a bomb. Every single car on the grid that uses fuel is a bomb with a steering wheel. So to say that safety is the most important thing, in my eyes, using basic logic and putting passion aside, that's hypocritical. Because racing is always going to be dangerous. If you actually cared about safety as much as they claim to, you wouldn't race at all, because that is the safest option. So to say safety comes first is quite simply wrong, because if it was, racing wouldn't be a thing. It's like saying that skydiving should be all about safety. Well, no, you're jumping out of a plane. There is an inherent danger always there, no matter how safe you make it. If you have a trampoline, if you jump in a padded suit, if you have a parachute, you are still jumping out of a plane at the end of the day. Things fail, things go wrong, that's something that you accept and you have to sign a waiver for more often than not, so that if you do die, nobody's going to sue the company, because that inherent danger is there. And although the fans may not recognise that or want to accept that, the lawyers really do. They know. That's why they get you to sign those waivers. That's why they have contracts stipulating insurance claims and all that kind of stuff to cover their own backside, because they know all too well that the dangers are there. All this stuff about safety is just to appease the public and to allow the sport to continue. It's not because they actually care about the drivers, because think about it. What is the best viewed footage of motorsport? Crashes. People love carnage. It's why stuff like NASCAR has so many crash highlights. It's why people love stock car racing, destruction derby, monster trucks crushing cars. People like to see things being destroyed. So to say safety is the #1 thing just is a lie. It's a lie which they may want to believe themselves, but that's just the way it is. Now that aside, I don't have an issue with increasing safety. Of course not. I don't want the drivers to die. But I do think that there are ways that safety has kind of cancelled out things, or not necessarily directly cancelled out things, but a combination of safety and pride of certain teams has cancelled out innovations that could have still been around today. And the one that I always go back to is fan car technology. Because if you think about it, if the system of the fan car, which of course originated with the Chaparral 2J, it was then refined more with the Brabham, and of course, fictionally speaking, with the Red Bull X1 series on Gran Turismo. And now, interestingly as well, for those who maybe don't know, Ariel has actually made an Ariel Atom concept car that uses fan car technology, but for the street. That's pretty cool. I don't know if they'll actually make it on the road, but the concept is cool enough. But that technology was not banned because of safety. There was a very vague overall claim that it was, from the other drivers saying that stones were being flicked up. Really? Really? Stones? You're a race driver and you care about stones being flicked up? Come on now. But it wasn't banned for safety. It was banned because it was deemed to be giving the car too much of an advantage, which wasn't fair to the other teams. Certain teams in particular, such as McLaren, had very big issues with fan car technology. And that's understandable. People have egos, and of course at the end of the day you're there to win, not to lose. And if you think that you have the chance of making that car's advantage go away, then of course you're going to try and take that. But the fan car technology, had it stuck around and had it been developed more, the Brabham already showed 8 years later that you could instantly make it better just by deleting the middleman, and in so doing get rid of the snowmobile engine and have it driving straight off of the car's engine itself. I believe it was off of the gearbox, if memory serves. You save weight, you save fuel, you make it simpler, cleaner, more efficient, more straightforward, and it worked. Niki Lauda won the race, the only race that the car ever finished, by 30 seconds. That doesn't really happen in the Grand Prix. But he did it in that amazing car. And then it's never been used since, to my knowledge. 1978 is the last time we saw a fan car race. So it only had an 8-year career between two vehicles that only did a few races between them. The Chaparral did a full season, the Brabham did one race. And both of them were kicked out, in effect, for ego reasons. The other teams didn't like it and found pathetic excuses as to why it shouldn't be used, quite frankly, because at the end of the day, the issue that I have is, if you've got this amazing technology, why do you want it to be banned? It's not like Brabham has a patent on it. It's not like Chaparral has a patent on the technology. Why don't you just do it as well? If you have a piece of technology that can instantly make every car on the grid, say, 3 seconds quicker per lap, which on the right track a fan car system could easily do, especially in something as extreme as Grand Prix or Can-Am, then why wouldn't you want that to happen? Why wouldn't you want all of the teams using different variations of it? Even just between the 2J and the BT46B, you saw two variations that were wildly different on the same concept. They both had their advantages, both had potential disadvantages, but they both tried something different, and it worked brilliantly both times. The Chaparral had reliability issues, the Brabham had no issues at all, really, but people didn't like it. But imagine having a full grid of all these different teams all using variations on this fan concept. Maybe one car has a single fan, maybe one car has two, maybe one has a separate engine. Of course, that was banned. You're not allowed to have a separate engine that drives anything but the wheels. That's fair enough. The Brabham solved that issue. But, again, obviously it was banned, blah, blah, blah. But if all of the cars ended up using variations of it, then the technology would have been refined even more. And imagine what it would be like now. We could have gotten to the point, were it not for the egos of certain teams, where now the fan car could have become as prevalent as the rear wing. And that's not an overstatement, because the benefits of a fan car outweigh the benefits of a wing. Because for those who maybe don't have an in-depth knowledge of aerodynamics, the way a rear wing, or a spoiler, as some people call it, or an aerofoil, works is that as wind or air passes over it, a current of air, the wing, especially the angle of the wing itself, sends that air upward, which pushes the car into the ground. That, of course, increases grip. Just like if you were holding a toy car on a table, if you were to flick the back of the car and it just rolled across the table, it would just do that. If, though, you push your finger down on the car, then of course that car has much more traction, just like with a wing. Now, the disadvantage of a wing, and this is a disadvantage which every single car, road car or race car, every single one of them that uses a wing for downforce has, and that is that by the nature of the design itself, it requires speed to work. You have to have a sufficient airflow passing over the wing for it to produce enough downforce to give you good handling, which is why something like a Caparo T1, when it's not burning people to a crisp and when it's working properly, you have to be traveling at like 90 miles per hour to be able to take a corner. Because if you're going slower, then it just will not turn properly. You don't have the airflow required and the car will spin out. And you can feel that on a lot of race cars on a lot of games. If you get, say, a GT3 car, turn the downforce right down, or just go around the track at a lower speed than you usually would, you will find, strangely enough, to those who don't understand aerodynamics, it may initially seem strange, that if you sometimes go slower through a corner, you'll actually feel the car trying to slide more than if you were going more quickly. And it's because of that downforce. Now, what the fan car does, in its most basic logical assessment, if you really think about it and make it as simple as possible, is it eliminates that flaw. It takes all of the advantages of a rear wing, namely increasing grip, and it eliminates the airflow requirement because the fan produces its own airflow with suction. So you get the same result, if not better. You can definitely get more downforce with a fan than with a wing, but it does it at all speeds, and that is why it's so good. You can get the maximum amount of downforce while you're standing still, whereas with a wing, that's just physically impossible. And that is awesome. Now, you cannot come and tell me from an engineering point of view, because that is what I am. You cannot come to me as a mechanic or as an engineer and tell me that a fan is not as safe as a wing, because that is quite simply wrong. A fan is much safer than a wing because you get maximum downforce and maximum grip at all times. How could that possibly not be as safe as a wing? Now, once you factor in that and accept the fact that a fan car is categorically safer than having a spoiler and more efficient and allows the car to be quicker, which in turn makes the crowds who go to these events and fund them with their tickets more happy because the cars are more competitive and faster, then why wasn't it used? Because, as I said earlier, it's all about ego. McLaren didn't want to lose. Various other teams didn't want to lose. And of course they didn't want to lose. But if you don't want to lose, you don't ban a good idea. You just use it yourself and make it better. If everyone banned every piece of good technology over the years, then imagine how boring Formula One cars would be now. Now, I personally find them boring as is, but imagine how much more boring they would be. They would be these slow bubble cars with maximum safety. It would be almost impossible to die in one. But the speed would be like a third of what it is now. The handling would be obviously much better because the cars aren't going quicker, and it would just be something totally different to what we currently have if safety was really that number one thing. Kind of like what I mentioned earlier. Whereas imagine what Formula One cars would be like now if they all used fan technology. Imagine how awesome a modern F1 car from McLaren or Ferrari or Red Bull, whatever, could be with that kind of tech. Not only would they be quicker, but they would also categorically be more safe. And that's even if you just use the Brabham method of having it run off of the gearbox. Imagine where we could be at now, because that is 1978 technology, and it's still remarkable to this day. So imagine if the development had continued, what it could have been like by now. We could have had advancements in fan technology that we can't even imagine now because it just hasn't happened, and the research just hasn't gone into it. So for me, stuff like that always hinders my enjoyment of motorsport, not just the Le Mans, but Grand Prix, the Le Mans, basically any form of racing where the cars are fast enough to justify that. Because there are circumstances, of course, where you wouldn't want a fan system. something like rally, for instance, because that really would throw dirt everywhere. And when you're having a form of motorsport like rallying, where the car spends a certain amount of time off the ground over jumps and stuff like that, or on an uneven surface, then having a fan system would be negligible. It wouldn't even be working properly most of the time, and when it was, you'd be sucking mud up into the car, or snow, or grit, and it just wouldn't work. So, of course, I'm not trying to say that the fan system is some kind of holy grail that fixes every issue with motorsport and makes it better across the board. Of course not. NASCARs also wouldn't necessarily need them. It would be interesting to see NASCARs with a fan system, but it's not entirely necessary. And there are also other forms of racing as well, which wouldn't necessarily need it. Touring cars, they don't really need fan systems. The wings are good enough. Or drag racing, for instance. A fan system would most likely make a drag car slower because you wouldn't be able to launch as quickly. So there are definitely circumstances where you wouldn't need it to be done. But I'm talking top tier stuff. Grand Prix, LMP, that kind of thing. Maybe even other series that could have spawned from advanced technology that we just don't even have at all now. Stuff like what Garage 56 tries to embody in the Le Mans, where they have those experimental vehicles running with the pack, like the Delta Wing. And overall, I do like the Le Mans more than any other form of motorsport, because it's always been the place where you can showcase more of that kind of experimental tech, which other motorsport might not allow. But that's basically it for my overall thoughts on modern motorsport, and I'll see you guys next time. But for now, as always, thanks for watching.